As we were learning more and more about the Millennium Development Goals, a new question was entering our agenda and was forcefully stealing the show. How is it that Millennium Development Goals are so little known? Why does the main media not cover what governments are doing to improve the lives of hundreds of millions of persons? Why do international institutions find it so difficult to tell journalists what they're doing for reducing extreme poverty and social exclusion?
It's not only the question of the children, it's a question of the parents behind, it's a question of the community behind. So medias may only show the African child, but it wasn't a question of the African child, it was the whole community that was touched by the subject. So this is a big issue, and medias don't really link it to, let's say, trade decisions they take here.
Why?
Maybe they don't want to go into that.
But there is a more fundamental problem with the media at this point of time, which we must not ignore, which is that there is very little interest in the media to cover these issues. And it has to do with the patterns of ownership and the profit motive of the media. When I say that the media industry in India is expanding rapidly and it's got several millions and billions of dollars invested, they are going by the profit motive. So very good journalists working in these media houses will find it very difficult to consistently report on anything like the MDGs. Why? Because the editorial staff will say, come on, who wants to hear about these things? Who is interested about child malnutrition? Who is worried about domestic abuse and domestic violence? The paper has to have good news. People, my average reader wants to, when he's in the car, he wants to say, hey, new car introduced and new cosmetics have come in and the new mall has opened. This is what they want to hear. They want to hear sensationally good news when they get up in the morning, not bad news every day. So one of the things which we started talking about is that when the media, when agencies like UNDP, UNICEF take the journalists, they are telling them about what are positive things happening on the ground. Where have communities really worked together with the government, with local governments to transform the situation and improve their own conditions of life? That is the element of empowerment, that people themselves, in working in partnership with a number of agencies at the community level, have made a remarkable change to the way the conditions of life. So those stories need to be brought in much more strongly.
We see a lot that the Commission doesn't control, it's going in corruption, it's going in the pockets of dictators. This is not true. The money we provide in most of these countries is going directly on the ground, directly to the benefit of the people. We don't finance the regime. We finance projects, we finance policies.
The most important companies today actually value themselves on intellectual capital. They don't actually look at financial capital assets. You're as strong as your staff, your workforce. And the same would apply to a nation state. You're as strong as your population. So unless you educate your population, unless you empower them and build intellectual capabilities and capacities, that's where your ultimate strength is. So India has massive potential. It's a huge futures market, but it can only obtain that potential if it invests in its people.
Millions of children lack access to school education. The second Millennium Development Goal is that all children obtain basic school education. The MDG 2 aims at guaranteeing the right to learn for all children, boys and girls alike, whether rich or poor, in developed and in developing nations. Right now, this is not so. In sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, only 2 out of 3 children access primary school education. And it is especially the girls that get left out. The current global effort is to support African governments and civil society in following the example of the Asian and South American nations that are successfully extending universal primary education to most of their children.
Even though we have a number of problems in Europe, even though we have a number of disparities in our society, social cohesion has been for many, many years at the heart of the architecture of the European Union. Solidarity, because social cohesion is also about solidarity. And within the European Union, as you may know, we have put into place for many, many decades now what we call the structural funds, which are a number of funds where the European Union budget is made available to regions of Europe who are lagging behind in terms of development, or in terms, we have also the social fund, which is, to help a number of workers to reconvert and so on and so forth. So, this notion of social inclusion, social cohesion has been very much at the heart of the European Union. Since India started its program, its national program, Education for All, which is mainly centered on primary education, we have been contributing to the tune of 207 million euros.
According to the last census, 300 million Indians could not read and write, of which 200 million were women.
लड़कियों को सब लोग ज़्यादा पसंद नहीं करता है।
आपको बड़े होके क्या बनना है? हाँ? पायलट? जी। अच्छा, क्यों?
आसमान का सर कर।
वाह, बहुत अच्छा है। उड़ने का मन है?
जी बेटा।
कहाँ उड़ना है?
आसमान में।
In 2002, India enacted the historic 86th Indian Constitutional Amendment Act that declared elementary education as the fundamental right for all children. With 304 million Indian citizens still non-literate, the educational challenge could not be addressed merely with declarations of rights. So the Government of India launched the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, the Education for All program. Largely funded by the Indian government, this program has also received around 250 million euros from the World Bank and the European Union. In 2009, the Indian Parliament took a further step and passed the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act and delegated all Indian states the duty to provide free and compulsory education to all children between 6 and 14 years old. And in order to increase the enrollment of girls in primary schools, the Indian government set up 3,600 residential schools across the country for 6 to 14-year-old girls from the most marginalized communities. Our team visited one such school in Sarnath, a town associated with Lord Buddha and located in the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. Here, besides the academic curricula, girls learn life skills and performing arts. They learn their rights and they learn to defend themselves. They understand their role and value in family and society, and they acquire self-confidence. They learn to be proud of being women.
आजकल देख रहे हैं कि लड़कियों का छोटे पे भी शादी हो जा रहा है। बच्चे छोटे ही रह रहे हैं तो माता पिता शादी कर दे रहे हैं गांव में, तो उसके लिए थोड़ा सा बताना होगा सबको। चिड़िया चिड़िया उड़ती जाए, चिड़िया चिड़िया उड़ती जाए, खुशी खुशी से गाना गाए, खुशी खुशी से गाना गाए। उसमें से एक चिड़िया उड़ गई, बाकी बचे जीरो।
ये लगता है कि हम बहुत ऐसी चीज़ कर रहे हैं कि जो शायद कम लोग कर पा रहे हों। वैसे तो टीचर सभी जाते हैं स्कूल में पढ़ाते हैं, पैसा पाते हैं, लेकिन पैसा मुझे भी मिल रहा है, लेकिन साथ साथ इन बच्चों की जो सिंपैथी मिलती है हमको और अपनत्व की जो भावना मिलती है, इन बच्चों को जब हम जोड़ रहे हैं तो ये बच्चे हमारे जो बिल्कुल बेकार हो रहे थे उसको अगर हम अच्छे नागरिक के रूप में तैयार कर रहे हैं तो हमारे समाज का, हमारे राष्ट्र का विकास होगा।
चार छोटी चिड़िया खाती थी अनार।
प्राइमरी में पढ़ते थे तो हमारा मन नहीं करता था उसमें पढ़ने का, उसमें पढ़ाई भी नहीं होती थी। बस मैडम सर आते थे, बैठकर कुर्सी पर फिर चले जाते थे। बच्चे चाहे मार करे, चाहे पीट करे, चाहे मरे, चाहे जो भी करे, सर नहीं बोलते थे सर मैडम। इसीलिए हम अपना घर पे छोड़ देते, हम घर पे ही रहते थे। एक दिन तब पेपर में निकला था तो मेरी बुआ एक खो है, वो आंगनबाड़ी में पढ़ाती हैं, वही हमको यहाँ पर लेकर आई, मेरा नाम लिखवाई यहाँ पर, तो हम पढ़ने लगे।
नोटबुक मिलता है, 2-3 पेन मिलता है और रोल रबर।
हम लोग मैम से कहते हैं मैम हम लोग के पास पेन नहीं है, हम लोग को दे देती है मैम।
रंग पेन देती हैं।
रबी हम लोग खूब खर्चा करते हैं, मैडम कहती हैं तुम लोग जितना भी लिखना तुम लोग लिखा करो, चिंता मत किया करो, हम है ना देने के लिए, मैडम हम लोग को देती है।
हम लोग कभी कभी भूल से मम्मी भी कर देते हैं।
ऐसे परिवार हैं जो बच्चों को फीस की वजह से नहीं पढ़ाते हैं, उनका मुख्य है कि हम पहले खाने का इंतज़ाम करें तब हम बच्चों को पढ़ने के लिए भेजेंगे। तो सरकार की सोच ये रही कि इन बच्चों गरीबी रेखा के नीचे की लड़कियों को 6 से 14 साल की जिन्होंने बीच में स्कूल छोड़ दिया है, 1-2 में स्कूल गई, 3 में गई, जो ड्रॉप आउट बच्चे हैं, उनको हम उनका एडमिशन ले लें ऐसी जगह जहां वो घर से आके हॉस्टल में ही रहें, पूरे 24 घंटे की दिनचर्या उनकी यहीं रहे, उनके लिए रहने, खाने, पढ़ने सारी व्यवस्था हम करें कि बच्चा उस माहौल में रह के अच्छे से जो उसके स्किल है उसको अच्छे से डेवलप कर सके।
मेरे मम्मी पापा हमेशा यही सोचते हैं कि हम कितने भी गरीब हों, हमको अपनी पगड़ी भी उतारनी हो तो हम अपनी पगड़ी भी उतार देंगे, लेकिन अपने बच्चों को तीनों को पढ़ा के अपना नाम रोशन करेंगे। क्योंकि लड़कियां आज का मेरे मम्मी पापा भी यानी सबके मम्मी पापा देख रहे हैं कि लड़कियां ना यानी कितने ऊपर जा रही हैं, और तो इसीलिए हमारे मम्मी पापा कहते हैं कि बेटा तुम जितना पढ़ोगे हम अपना घर बेच के तुमको पढ़ाएंगे, लेकिन तुम अगर नाम रोशन करना है बेटा तो तुम लोग मेरे बेटे समान हो।
एक दिन एक आदमी पता पूछते हुए आया, तो वो लिखा हुआ था वो एड्रेस, तो उन लोग से पूछा तो उन लोग नहीं बता पाई, तो हम उधर से गुजर रहे थे तो हमको बुला पूछा यहाँ, तो हम गए तो हम कहे कि क्या, तो कहें कि ये पता मुझे बता सकती हैं, तो उधर एक बड़ा सा काला सा रहता है उसी पे लिखा था, तो हम कहे कि हाँ थोड़ा से आगे जाएंगे, बाएं गली में मुड़ेंगे, सामने गेट है उसी जगह है, तो कहें कि थैंक यू बेटा। तो उन लोग हंसने लगी, हम कहे कि क्यों हंस रही हो, तो कहें कि वो तुमको क्या बोल के गया, तो हम कहे कि वो हमको थैंक यू बोला, हमको धन्यवाद बोला है, तो करें अच्छा। हम कहे कि तब क्यों हंस रही, हम कह रहे कि हम सोचे कि गाली दिया है,
माँ बाप भी ये भले जानते हैं, कहते हैं कि जैसे ये बाल विवाह का, ये जल्दी शादी का ही है कि हमारे आस पड़ोस में सब लोग कर देते हैं, कहते हैं कि नहीं करोगे अच्छा नहीं, ये तरह तरह की बातें फैलती हैं, लेकिन वो भी समझते हैं कि नहीं ये अच्छी चीज़ है, ठीक है हमारी बच्ची पढ़ रही है तो हम नहीं करेंगे, हमारी बच्ची नहीं तैयार है कि दूसरे के कहने से क्या होता है। तो धीरे धीरे पेरेंट्स में भी बदलाव आ जाता है बच्चों के थ्रू।
तो एक शिक्षा के भी यही एक माध्यम है जिससे हम इन प्रतिभाओं को निकाल सकते हैं और ढूंढ सकते हैं, क्योंकि आगे राष्ट्र का निर्माण यही बच्चे करेंगे।
37% of the kids in class 5 cannot read a text meant in class 2. Now, if you say, therefore, the benefits aren't reaching the target population, in one sense you're right. But what can a government do? It sets up schools, it hires teachers. So we say, well, you need more parent-teacher involvement, you must have the local community, forcing accountability, teachers must be made to teach. You know, these are things that are not just done by governments. These are things that are done by social pressure, by social awareness.
When the Constitution was framed in 1950, the argument was made that education was not a fundamental right. Because the government then said we do not have the financial resources to ensure. India's population in 1950 was about 350 or 360 million. Now, of course, we're over 1 billion. But in those days also the government said we don't have the financial resources, so give us 10 years. And within 10 years we'll progressively see that all children are in school. 1960 came, 1970 came, 1980 came, 1990 came. The same argument, we don't have the financial resources, we don't have the financial resources. And in the meantime, what were you seeing? India was becoming an absolutely top-rate country for higher education. I mean, the Indian Institutes of Technology, the IITs are very well known. The Indian Institutes of Management, the IIMs. I studied in IIM Ahmedabad. They were fantastic institutions. They put out the best managers who are now all over the world doing exceptionally well. So when you look at these kinds of higher institutions, India did very well. But the neglect of basic education and schooling was unforgivable. And it took the civil society movement, the right to education movement, years of pushing and pushing and pushing until it was made a fundamental right in 2003.
Although India still has a long way to go, with only 8 million children out of school in 2009, it has started walking on the path towards ensuring the right to education for each Indian child. In fact, most Indians believe that education for all is the best investment that families and governments can make. The benefits of such investments will be enjoyed by all.
Can India afford these high levels of investment in basic health and education? But a more fundamental way of posing the question today is, can India afford not to invest in basic health, basic education, basic nutrition, and these essentials of life?
Development cooperation is definitely a very particular issue, because from one side it's rather technocratic approach on programming, on projects. From other, it's very human, because you deal with kids that have no chance to get to school. You deal with a mother that has a lot of chance to die during the childbirth. You deal with young people that have no chance to get to work. So you really try to get in the position of these people and try to think, well, how I could support it.
So the problem is, it's human nature, and human nature is intrinsically selfish, it's self-protective, and it looks at immediately self, then it looks at family, then it looks at its community, then it looks at its faith and religious stuff. And because everybody's operating in those boundaries and seeing everybody as the other, not as themselves, as humanity. So selfish action by one state, trying to hoard water or block it upstream, is actually going to affect another state. But in fact, an issue like climate change, as we see more dramatic monsoons or uneven monsoons, desertification, huge cyclones. Earthquakes are not affected by climate change, that's a different factor. But as we see these humanitarian disasters happening on a scale, you realise that you cannot operate in isolation. You can no longer be an individual or country and behave in a selfish and irresponsible manner, because actually it affects everybody in the world. What happens on one side of the world is going to have a big impact on the other. And I think that's where the change, where the knowledge, people start to accept and understand that their behaviour is going to affect others and ultimately themselves, then that's where change will take place, because you can no longer be selfish in a joined-up world.
One of the basic principles of development work is empowerment. But we noticed that generally, when there is goal in communication, international institutions, government, or even NGOs, they try to talk directly to the public and skip those which are normally the communicators which are trusted to the public. So the whole idea of this project is to change the partner and say we want to empower those communicators that are trusted to the public and not try to win over the public.
Yes.
And we don't want to win over the journalists. We just want to empower them to talk about what is being done, because we want them to evaluate.
Yeah.
And we want their role to be a fundamental role in the dialogue with the public.
Yeah.
And so they have to be aware of the efforts we are, let's say we, as I'm talking about, and as NGO, but we are trying to make for them, and then evaluate us.
Essendo televisione, che tutti pensano o finora hanno pensato, è quella che dice la verità, l'ha detto la televisione, tu hai la responsabilità di condizionare fortemente l'opinione italiana, qui lavoro e qui emetto e diffondo le cose che raccolgo in giro, di informare l'opinione italiana su tutto quello che il mondo in questo momento dice, pensa, soffre, vive, il modo con cui vive e il modo con cui muore, e il modo che tocca a noi di spiegare a chi invece lo vive per sentito dire, per pregiudizi, per paura, per ansia dell'ignoto, e noi siamo il tramite etico, conoscitivo, espressivo tra il mondo noto, che è il nostro, e tutto ciò che non è noi, l'ignoto, e noi dobbiamo sempre trasferire in maniera rassicurante tutto ciò che la gente che vive in Italia non sa, e tutto ciò che non è qui noi dobbiamo spiegare che ha la stessa importanza di tutto ciò che c'è qua, e le lingue che non conosciamo non è colpa degli altri se non le conosciamo, ma magari dobbiamo fare lo sforzo per impararle.
So Christians and Muslims have been coexisting in Syria for centuries.
Yeah.
Has there been something that has inspired you from the spirit of this coexistence of Muslims and Christians that has helped you in the work of dialogue that you have been doing in the past years?
This society, Vrinda, is very, very plural. We have, for example, many Christian communities. We have Chaldean communities. There's also the people that are in India as Malabars. We have Syriac, Orthodox, and Catholic that are in India as Malabar. We have Byzantine speaking Arabic. We have Armenians, Maronites. So it's a complex community with a lot of memory. And Muslims are also plural, and Sunni and Shiites and Alawites and Ismailis and Druze, and it's a complex society. So this is a challenge. But the common element of 14 centuries of common life is good neighborhood. These people, Syria looks like having a practice, a culture, civilization of good neighborhood in civilizational, cultural, the religious, symbolic pluralism from, I would say, 5,000 years ago, before Islam and before Christianity and before the Bible. Because Syria is a big highway of the beginning of the civilization, being the highway between the three valleys, the Hindu Valley, the Mesopotamia Valley, and the Nile Egyptian Valley. And this will create from Syria the starting point for the other enormous civilization valley that we can call it the Mediterranean Valley.
In Syria now, it's a time of division, violence and suffering. When we were there in November 2010 and in August 2011, we recorded many stories of cooperation and development. Nowadays, only sad and violent stories are narrated about this wonderful country. What then shall we do with these stories we collected in Syria in what now seems to be a different age altogether? Well, we decided to re-edit the videos we had made, include them in the handbook we are developing, and share them through the internet and television. These videos will help us remember what Syria was before the civil war. And we do hope that these stories will help restore trust amongst communities in Syria and build amongst those who love this country the motivation to do whatever they can to restore peace and cooperation.
Basically, it started with areas with large levels of Iraqi refugees, but subsequently that project has actually been extended out of into areas of northern Syria and much further than just Damascus.
In 2011, we visited a school in Damascus where most students were refugees from Iraq. The school was run by the Syrian government and education was free for all students. It was a school where a special education program was being pilot tested.
فهلا نحن بنشوف كمان شو النواحي التربويه اللي بتعطيها المدرسه صديق الطفوله من تعلم نشط، من تعامل جاذب ومحبب للطفل، فبدا التعليم في بفكره المدرسه صديق الطفوله انه هو التعليم يكون مركز حول الطفل، فاذا الطفل هو الاساس. هلا رح نفوت نحن على الصف ورح نشوف نموذج لصف تعلم نشط، ما رح احكي كثير عنه، خلينا ناخذ صوره ونشوف نشوف المعلمه ونشوف الاولاد وبنحكي بعدها، فتفضلوا.
Designed in cooperation between the Syrian Ministry for Education, UNICEF and the European Union, the objective of this special program was to promote a child-centered approach in education.
طيب كيف شلون حسيتي انت معلمه طبعا السنه الماضيه يعني وما كان هذا فبتحكي لنا شوي شو الشغلات اللي حسيتيها بضمن هالتجديد اللي صار السنه؟
لا يعني كثير صار في فرق كبير يعني بين قبل وحاليا يعني. اول شيء الالواح الطباشير كان كثير زي الولد عم يتنفس مثلا خاصه بالشتويه بصير رشح بعد وكمان الغبره الانست له.
The greatest challenge of this initiative was the active involvement of the entire community.
Absolutely. So one of the key things of the Child-Friendly Schools model is to get the community very much involved. So in the latest round of rehabilitations, for example, we held round tables with staff, students, kids and community. So that's everyone from the community could come along and we would show them what was on offer.
The next phase of the program was to train other Syrian teachers so that the lessons learned in these experimental schools could have been shared and applied across schools in Syria.
انه هي نموذج لمدارس كتير من ضمن المدارس اللي عم نشتغل فيها بمحافظات اخرى ان كان بالحسكه او بدير الزور او بحمص حتى بدمشق بريف دمشق وبالقنيطره.
I mean, I think Syria unfortunately has suffered from very bad stereotypes in the past, and I think those are being broken down. And you know, the influence of the EU and UNICEF working with them, working alongside the Ministry of Education, who might have been seen back in the day as, you know, a very hard organisation to crack. But they've been absolutely supportive of what we've done, and they've taken on a lot of sort of the, you know, the real significant changes in teaching technique, and they've taken these on board. So yeah, it's broken down stereotypes, even on a day-to-day basis with us walking into schools, which has been a very rare thing in Syria, and you know, interacting with children, and so it's definitely broken down stereotypes.
These were images of children in Syria in 2011. Since the start of the civil war in 2012, hundreds of children have been killed in Syria. Thousands have been displaced, and hundreds of thousands have had their relatives killed, wounded, arrested, deported, and these numbers are increasing every day. Perhaps it should be compulsory for decision makers, before they take on any form of leadership, to first be school teachers. Perhaps only then would they acquire that humaneness that is needed for being authentic and trusted community leaders. Because liberation is always a blossoming of enabled personalities. Instead, imposition of whatsoever value and norm does not liberate anyone, and violence brutalizes the souls of all.
Quindi un messaggio di una sfida nuova del come coniugare gli aspetti locali specifici di ogni realtà e di ogni territorio di dove andiamo e una responsabilità comune di come orientare i rapporti internazionali in un modo diverso devono essere uno degli aspetti che dobbiamo approfondire.
This today is in crisis because the idea of the modern state out of the French colony and then the modern Syriac Republic, it goes with the idea of citizenship with some rests of the past. People that went to Europe, somehow already this idea of the state comes from Europe. It's a modern idea of the state and the nation. And people that goes from all over the world to Europe, they have this experience of being citizen before being Muslims, Jewish, Christian, whatever. Today, what the people ask for in our countries, in the Arabic countries, is to be, first of all, citizens, without, nevertheless, renouncing or putting aside the cultural religious elements of the identity.
It's, you know, multiple truth claims. It's that nobody has the answer to everything. Are we going to continue to say that development is all about catching up with the West, making others like us? You know, this is a is a very old historical problem of the world. You know, right from the time of, you know, the colonialism and even before, and it's not just a Western problem. I think it's a problem of all over the world. You know, I mean, I see it in India. You know, every group thinks that the way they are the right, their way is the right way, and somebody else's way is the distorted way. And in worse situation, it's not just different, it becomes the wrong way. And when you stop accepting the other people's way, and the, you know, the use of violence, etc., starts happening. But fundamentally, I think it's an act of violence to say somebody else's way is lower or not okay. So what is the way to? So I think that is the issue which needs to be confronted in this business of aid.
So the challenge of listening and being inclusive of community voices means that you'll have a much stronger solution to their problems. And I genuinely believe that all communities, and I'm putting myself on a limb here when I say all communities, but I genuinely do think that all communities can actually find their own solutions if you actually create the space around them and create the enabling environment and create the resources to make change. They very often can come up with the right answers.
What I find that somehow is missing is the knowledge, the preparation of the average newsmakers about dealing with these issues. Yes. It's not just lacking data, but it's just lacking the overall awareness, because sometimes they do not consider themselves really as evaluators. They are happy just with denouncing.
Yes.
Oh, this is wrong, so we denounce it. Or see how, but then they don't denounce it to whom? Who is taking care of what? So the whole aspect of evaluation work, which is something that I think would be very much needed. I think that would be about enabling media to do a fair evaluation, and that's a long process.
So I think many of the goals we are talking about, human development goals, in a democracy, I mean in an autocracy, they can be achieved top-down. Because you can just enforce accountability. If you fire 10% of the teachers for non-performance, the other 90% will perform. You can't do that in a democracy. So the only other way you do that is by social mobilization and putting social pressure. That requires participation, empowerment of Panchayati Raj institutions, capacity building, social homogeneity.
And I think in terms of the earlier question you asked about the journalist and the communication, it is absolutely a missing element everywhere. You have fantastic research institutions. You may have a fantastic consulting company doing an evaluation. What happens? They are not good communicators. It is impossible to read a 500-page report and tell you what is it that they are saying. Some of it is very technical. So who is going to take the reports that are produced both by the government on performance or by an evaluation group on outcomes and communicate it in a manner that people can understand? In fact, many times they don't do it. I almost think it's a conspiracy there, because nobody wants to say anything bad, so you just keep quiet, you submit the report, you collect the money and you go home. Sometimes they say the research institution should have a budget for dissemination. But the research institution is not a competent and qualified communicating agency. Why do you think that the best researcher, social scientist, is also the best public communicator? It should not be, need not be. So that gap of how do you take these evaluations and reports and ideas is a missing element.
To me, what is the main pattern in India is not so much that it's all bad news and no good news. To me, the main issue is whose news is it, and there's a general pattern of complete inability to focus on the issues of the private people and of the mass of the population. And that has a lot to do, of course, with the character of the media and the fact that it's becoming more and more of a kind of advertisement business. And if it's an advertisement business, then obviously your target audience is not the general public, it's those who have purchasing power. So it's more and more now, even though of course generally the quality of the Indian media is still very good, I would say, at least in international perspective, it's becoming more and more of a kind of middle class oriented media, with a lot of good news and bad news of interest to the middle class, but with a huge number of issues of interest to the larger mass of people which get sidelined. For example, health, if you look at healthcare and the state of the healthcare system in this country, which is really a critical issue for so many people, it hardly gets talked about in the mainstream media. So these are kinds of blind spots that I think are a big concern. So it's not so much good news and bad news, but whose news are we conveying?
I live in this country and I see so many issues around. There is clearly so much of development that needs to happen in every sphere. Is there a way I can contribute? I think that was the very, very simple starting point of the foundation. Then the key choice that we made at the foundation was to work on the issue of education, on the issue of improving quality of school education in India. And the heart of the choice lies in the issue that we are a nation of 1.2 billion people. We have a school education system where 1.4 million schools are there. 220 million children go to those schools. The quality of schooling, the actual learning that happens, is far from desirable. Actually, it's very poor. 35% of children in class 5 cannot read or write. The school completion rates are in the range of 10%.
I want to ask you what
sustainability means for you and also for Wipro.
When you're running a business, let's say we're talking about Wipro, and we're talking about making profits and growing, is it going to last over a period of time? It's not just a matter of reporting healthy growth numbers this quarter or next quarter. It's about having healthy growth and profitable growth for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. If you look at a long period of time, social issues have a deep impact on business, very, very deep impact on business. And therefore, that's an issue that is as much a part of business sustainability, and therefore all business people must be involved with it. So from a long-term standpoint, Wipro's sustainability, unless the education system improves in India substantially, that's questionable.
This school we started in the year 2007. This school is particularly for children of migrant laborers, those who have come from different places for construction work. They'll be frequently migrating from one place to another. So education in a regular school will not work. Here, they're happy and they're motivated to learn something.
Therefore, in our minds, if we can do a good job of education in this country, that will enable development from every perspective, whether it be health, whether it be livelihood, whether it be governance. And that's why we chose education. And changes in society don't take place in 3 months, 6 months. This is a very long-term connection issue, which is for this large country with 1.2 billion people, and which will become 1.6 billion people, give it another 25, 30 years. How do we have good education? Because good education, in many senses, is at the core of development.
So now she's telling because of this school, there were two of them were able to complete their education over here and were able to go to mainstream's regular school. Then we cannot send these children outside immediately, but now they are confident and they are going to Marthalli next to neighborhood school and able to perform. We do have community meetings every month. So parents will share their development or their concerns and with the teachers, and every day compulsorily teachers are supposed to meet parents. Every day they visit labor camp, they meet parents, talk to them. They have very good rapport. Each and every family members teachers know and their concerns, basic general problems and all. They are completely aware of that. Okay, she wants to become a teacher because she wants to educate more and more children like her. Engineering, yake. Okay, his father wants him to become engineer, so he wants to fulfill that. Teacher, yake.
Why?
ಆಮೇಲೆ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಮಾತನ್ನ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಡೋದು ಅವ್ರ ವಿದ್ಯಾ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಕಲಿಸೋದು.
She also wants to become a teacher and she wanted to teach good behavior to children, how to behave and educate them.
And we realized, and we have now sort of got convinced over the past 10 years that education has the greatest multiplier effect. And it's the same old story. If you give somebody a fish, feed him for a day or feed her for a day. But if you teach somebody to fish, then you've taken care of his or her life.
The governments are not concerned about the growth of the individual. They are only worried about their economic growth. And so their policies in education are directed only towards economic improvement. Which means you treat education, you have a factory model of education, imagining that children are the raw material to be put in at one end, and after 15-20 years of processing them, out will come doctors and engineers and artists and farmers, and they will do all the work for us in the society. That's a very, very narrow view of education. But all over the world, that view has prevailed. So they're not really caring whether that individual will be a happy individual, whether he'll grow up with love and joy, work with joy, whether he'll have a global mind or a narrow-minded sectarian mind. They're not concerned about it. And so that needs to be brought in if we have to make these millennium goals a reality, because it really requires a global vision. And you won't achieve that just by putting it on paper. It has to be an actuality, which means human beings must grow up with a global vision, feeling for whole earth and whole of humanity.
In August 2011, when we passed through Syria during our journey back to Italy, political tensions were rising. Foreign journalists had been asked to leave the country, but we were not officially journalists, and it was still safe to travel around in Syria. With Paolo Dall'Olio, the Jesuit father founder of the monastic community of Mar Musa, we went to Aleppo to meet Dr. Abul Huda al-Husseini, a Sufi master and the head of an Islamic NGO promoting international dialogue.
المؤسسات التي تعتني بالفقه وتقوم بالصلاة وتنظيم الشعائر غالبا تكون رسمية، لأن المؤسسات الرسمية هي بمثابة أقفاص تقيد الإنسان، وعندما يتحرر الإنسان من هذه الأقفاص يستطيع أن يكون عالميا. مثال آخر، عندما تزداد الروحانية عندي يمكن أن أنفق من مالي على الفقراء وعلى الأيتام وعلى الضعفاء، ويمكن أن أساعد كل الضعفاء.
I ought to be here and to work for my country. It's very important for me. I miss my country all the time, especially Aleppo, my family, my father, and all my friends.
In Aleppo, we stayed in the house of Hind, a young Syrian Christian woman who had recently returned from Canada in order to take on a role in the political confrontations that were boiling up in Syria.
Before you ask your government for freedom, you should have your freedom at your house, at your society, at your street, at your area. We don't have it. So we were scared to ask freedom from our parents. We went to the government to ask them the freedom. So I don't believe this fictitious freedom. And if it's woman move, maybe I will respect it, but it's all man move. So I don't believe this freedom in this movement.
The way they are
acting, and I feel it's only like they want to disturb the country, in my point of view.
من المؤسف أن نجد مؤسسات عالمية تصدر العنف والتفجير مثل القاعدة، ولا نجد بهذا الحجم المؤسسات التي تصدر السلام والمحبة والتربية والارتقاء بالأخلاق لتكون مؤسسات عالمية أوسع انتشارا.
I'm scared. I'm really scared about the future.
ولكن الواقع هو أن الإعلام غالبا، لا أقول كل الإعلام، غالبا هو مرتبط بالمصالح المالية الاقتصادية أو السياسية. هناك من يفكر في مشروع خيري من أجل إيواء العجزة، من أجل رعاية الأيتام، لكن ليس هناك من يفكر بمساحة من ينفق على الإعلام من أجل سلام العالم.
After we left Syria, the political situation there quickly deteriorated. 6 months later, in February 2012, Father Paolo Dall'Olio was exiled from Syria, held guilty of criticizing the government. In July 2013, he clandestinely entered into Syria from Turkey, but got kidnapped by militants. There were reports that he had been executed by the rebels of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, but his death has never been confirmed. Mahmoud Abul Huda al-Husseini stayed on in Aleppo. His NGO has been very active in assisting the population of Aleppo and in trying to calm tensions between the different communities still living there. He sided with the freedom movement against the government of Bashar al-Assad. Hind returned to Canada when Christians started being persecuted in rebel-controlled localities of Aleppo.